directly into session 3, which focuses on creating an enabling sports environment for young people living with varying types of disabilities. Promoting inclusive sports means ensuring that various types of sports are accessible to all, not just modified. This session will focus on re-engineering a sustainable sporting program and spaces for young people and children with varying types of disabilities, with special emphasis on cognitive sports programs. The moderator for this session is Mr. Ranako Bailey, Hay Ambassador representing Barbados. Ranako, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ashley. We'll now begin by a presentation by Ms. Kerry Ifill, President of the Barbados Council for the Disabled. Ms. Kerry Ifill, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. And first off, I want to thank Ashley and team for inviting me to be a part of it. I'm not a youth anymore, but I am very passionate about inclusion and persons with disabilities. I must first begin with an apology. I have to leave very quickly, so my presentation will not be as long as it was intended, but I will do my best. Everybody's hearing me, right?
Yes, we are.
Okay, good. Yeah. Just making sure. Okay, so Article 31 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has this to say in subsection 5. With a view to enabling persons with disabilities to participate on an equal basis with others in recreational, leisure, and sporting activities, states parties shall take appropriate measures to A, encourage and promote the participation to the fullest extent possible of persons with disabilities in mainstream sporting activities that at all levels, to ensure that persons with disabilities have an opportunity to organize, develop, and participate in disability-specific sporting and recreational activities, and to this end, encourage the provision on an equal basis with others of appropriate instruction, training, and resources. C, to ensure that persons with disabilities have access to sporting, recreational, and tourism venues. D, to ensure that children with disabilities have equal access with other children to participate in play, recreation, leisure, and sporting activities, including those activities in the school system. In essence, those countries who have ratified this convention have agreed that people living with disabilities have a right to participate in sports. But why is it important to create this enabling environment? It's important because persons with disabilities are excluded too often from being a part of society and being a part of sports. They have limited opportunities to participate in sports, and it means that their well-being, physical and mental, is directly impacted by this lack of opportunity. Sporting disciplines develop problem solving. It develops a sense of self, a sense of our own importance, a sense that we belong to something that is more than who we are. Participating in sports afford persons with disabilities an opportunity to have a healthy outlook on life. There are many additional health risks that come with disabilities, and these are exacerbated, increased, and unfortunately extended when we lead the sedentary lives that many of us are called to lead because society prevents us from being a part of it. But what does it mean to create an enabling environment? It means building recreational sporting centers with the inclusion of persons with disabilities in their design. In other words, universal design. Training of coaches and associated professionals in how to train with and develop programs to include persons with disabilities. The provision of programs that ensure that persons with disabilities, especially the youth, can participate with their peers. It is not just enough to create an environment that allows us to play by ourselves, but we should be able to work along with others to develop a whole host of skills. But even greater than that is this benefit, the benefit that we can transform the society in which we live. When we play together, when we work together, we teach each other and we build each other up. We help others to recognize that we have value. We help others to understand that they can participate in things with us, that we are just like them. When the Olympics took place a few weeks ago and skateboarding was introduced for the first time, able and disabled persons sat and enjoyed the experience of watching the beauty of one of the youngest athletes in the world taking gold. When Paralympians display their abilities, their adroitness at taking part in their sports, the world looked on and was able to cheer their countries. Athleticism, participating in sports, should not be barriered by our disability. I must end at this point, but before I go, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine, my friend Ganesh from Guyana. Ganesh is a totally blind young man, and he will tell you, as he did in an article by the Caribbean Council for the Blind, that involvement in sports saved him. This is a quote from an article produced back in 2013 about Ganesh. Believing that all his dreams were shattered, Ganesh even contemplated suicide. But one day, the long-awaited wake-up call came when he heard about blind cricket. You can't believe how excited I was. Cricket was always my passion, and now I was being told that although I could not see, I could still play. For me, that was the turning point of my life, although it came 5 years after going blind. Everything took off from then on. Ganesh regained his confidence, attended workshops, and met others who could relate to his situation. When I started in blind cricket, I then got involved in other things, such as workshops, the sport of cricket. In the sport of cricket, you meet other blind persons and it rubs off on you and helps to build your confidence. After getting involved in blind cricket, Ganesh, who had thought that his life was over, has been able to attain his undergraduate degree and his master's in social work. And he is working to transform the lives of persons, not just the blind, but all persons living with disabilities in his country of Guyana. He participates in a number of important decision-making bodies, but it all began when blind cricket saved him. And that is why we need to create, promote, and encourage an enabling environment for youth with disabilities in sports. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kerry Ann Ifill. We now go over to Ms. Christina Lange, Program Specialist, Disability Inclusive Humanitarian Action with the Disability Section, Program Division, UNICEF. Ms. Lange, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ranako. And thank you to the Ashley Lashley Foundation and the Hey campaign, who are partners with UNICEF on this great initiative. Please do let me know if the sound is not clear. We've already heard about how important equal access to sport is, not only for promoting health, well-being and fostering connections, but also for building inclusive communities. Sports brings people together and bridges divides. At UNICEF, we conducted a study in 2020 exploring effective social behaviour communication approaches, and found that inclusive sports are one key approach to reducing stigma. Specifically that, and I quote, contact between members of stigmatised groups and others plays a key role in reducing stigma and discrimination. Programs that engage children with and without disabilities in unified sports have been shown to reduce stigmatizing attitudes. In the context of COVID-19 and its impacts, including movement restrictions, service disruptions, school closures, all of which have contributed to increased isolation of already marginalised groups, as well as added mental health burdens, the importance of inclusive sports is now even further amplified. But while we know the positive impact that sport has on individuals and societies, we also know that young people with disabilities often face multiple barriers to participation. For example, sports facilities are often constructed without consideration for accessibility. And even where facilities may be physically accessible, prevailing culture and wider social attitudes can present an even more significant obstacle. A UNICEF study conducted together with the Barcelona Football Foundation in 2019 highlighted a number of general recommendations for designing sporting activities that promote inclusion. So firstly, to develop team sports that are participatory and yet can be adapted to meet the needs of all children and youth. And so this is in relation to, for example, the format, the rules, the kit, the equipment, the facilities, etc. Secondly, to create supportive participatory environments that also publicly recognise the accomplishments of individuals from marginalised groups. And thirdly, to promote sports that challenge norms of ability and gender suitability, to remove social barriers that prevent marginalised children and young people from participating. Some of the more concrete recommendations in the study included to mix teams rather than having homogenous ones, to hire a diverse workforce of coaches and trainers and to train them to be fair, to justly address discrimination incidents and to meet the needs of all participants, especially children and young people with disabilities. And thirdly, to create accessibility, such as through financial subsidies for marginalised participants and adapting facilities for people with disabilities. Reflecting some of these recommendations, a number of UNICEF country offices have been working to create an environment where all young people have equal access to sports, including young people with disabilities. So I'd like to just spend the remainder of my time today sharing a few of these examples. In the first example from Azerbaijan, through UNICEF's ongoing support to the National Paralympic Committee in organising the 4th National Children's Paralympic Games, 190 children and adolescents with disabilities participated in sports. And in addition to the social inclusion of the young athletes, the initiative also helped to tackle the negative stereotypes and stigma associated with disability in the country. In a second example from Madagascar, UNICEF provided support to the Ministry of Education to train teachers and local trainers in inclusive training. And they supported the participation of students with disabilities in the National School Sports Games tournament. In Cuba, UNICEF, in alliance with the Cuban Ministry of Sport, contributed to the participation of 176 children throughout the country, and that included 64 children with disabilities at the National Tournament of Inclusive Football. Teachers from all the provinces received training to provide them with skills to include sport as a transforming and key educational tool to ensure full inclusion of children and adolescents with disabilities. And in the last example from Kenya, UNICEF and Special Olympics Kenya are working together to improve the capacities of sports for development organisations. They're conducting workshops on how to include children with intellectual disabilities in education and sports programs. So they're just a few examples. And perhaps just to share one more example, in the current context of movement restrictions and requirements for social distancing, we've seen innovative approaches needing to be developed, such as online platforms for participation in sports. And these innovations can also be an interesting avenue to explore in the longer term to expand access to sports for young people who may have more difficulty leaving their home. So to sum up, these examples have highlighted the wide range of actions that can be taken to dismantle the barriers to equal access to sports. Sport can be instrumental in creating inclusive societies. And in the context of multiple global challenges, including the climate crisis, it's essential that all young people, including those with disabilities, have equal access. And we all now have an important opportunity in the rebuilding from the COVID-19 pandemic to create a more enabling sports environment for all young people. And UNICEF looks forward to continuing to work with partners to realise this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lange, for sharing those examples with us. I will now open the floor to Ms. Alexandra Rickham, Diversity and Impact Manager for SailGP.
Hi, thank you for having me. Although I would like to think I'm still young, I was once a young person with disability. I had a shallow diving accident at age 13 and went from being a member of every sports club and team to having to find my path to eventually becoming a world champion and a double Paralympic medalist. To speak to you today, I had to work, and though I work in sustainability and diversity and inclusion, I had to reflect on that pathway to becoming an elite athlete. I've broken down creating enabling environments into what I see as three key areas of focus: access, integration, and inspiration. Access. So access is creating accessible environments. You've heard the previous two speakers talk about that. And when I'm talking about accessible environments, I have broken that down even further into like what I see as three key areas. One, physically, we need sporting facilities which are more accessible to a variety of disabilities, whether physical or cognitive. And that's really key, is that actually we're looking at the spectrum. Two is financially. The cost for people with disabilities and their families are ever increasing and are always more than the average family. So participating in sport should not be a luxury for only those with the means. And three, proximity and availability. For many people with disabilities, the day is longer and more complicated than non-disabled people. The added barrier of having to travel long distances and not having the availability of programs in their locality will always reduce participation. Integration. Creating inclusive environments where people with or without disabilities can participate and compete together should be our major end goal and our true focus when we're looking at sports endeavors. I believe this is particularly important for young people who don't want to be put in a box and separated from their peers simply due to their disability. I know I didn't like that when I was younger. I'm a sailor, and one of the reasons that I fell into sailing was actually because of the integration factor that sailing brought, because it is one of the few sports where people with or without disabilities can compete against each other on a level playing field. And finally, inspiration. And I think that this is amazingly important. And you've heard from the other speakers, but the reality is that, like everyone involved in sport, and frankly, anything that you're passionate about in your life, role models are key. Seeing people who look like you or are from the same background as you will push you to achieve and go past your limits. The Paralympics coming to London changed the UK's appreciation of disabled sport and actually of people with disabilities, and has now inspired a whole new generation of grassroots through to elite level participation. So I guess the question is on everybody's mind: how do we achieve this? How do we achieve those three? Unfortunately, this is the harder part. We need to actively lobby our governments, but more importantly, I think we need to start with education and make sure that sports in school encapsulates access and integration. And from this, we will certainly see a growth of inspiration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rickham. We now have a video by Ms. Lucy Meyer, spokesperson for Special Olympics, UNICEF USA Partnership for Children with Disabilities, and Hey Ambassador. Thank you very much. At this time, we'll now invite Ms. Lucy Meyer, spokesperson for Special Olympics, UNICEF Partnership for Children with Disabilities, and Hey Ambassador.
Good morning, ministers and distinguished guests. My name is Lucy Meyer. I am so happy to see all of you today. I am here as the Minister of Sport for the Hey campaign. I am also the spokesperson for the Special Olympics UNICEF USA Partnership for Young People with Disabilities and a champion for Generation Unlimited, which is hosted by UNICEF. I was born with cerebral palsy because I did not get oxygen for 5 minutes at birth. When I was just a few days old, the doctors told my parents that there might be a very good chance that I would never sit up or fall. I am so happy to report that the doctors were very wrong. Living with cerebral palsy means that I have both physical and intellectual disabilities. My right side doesn't work as well as my left, and day-to-day living can sometimes be a little more challenging for me. That might sound a little sad, but I love my life. I have a great family and tons of friends. I want to share with you how Special Olympics Unified Sports is an impactful and sustainable means for creating an inclusive sports environment for people with and without disabilities. It's truly life-changing for all who participate. Our world can be tough for all people, but especially for people who are labeled as different. People with disabilities don't do everything the same as people without disabilities, so we often get excluded. It is so important for people with disabilities like me to play, learn, and have fun, just like people without disabilities. To do this, there must be organized programming to make this a very natural process. I can't think of a better means to achieve this than through Special Olympics Unified Sports. Unified Sports combines athletes with and without disabilities to play on the same team. Unified Sports helps create acceptance for differences and inclusion, which are crucial to having a healthy society. This is the message that we need to spread around the world. When I was in high school with 3,000 students, my unified basketball team won a huge trophy that is now on display in my school's trophy case with trophies from the other schools' teams. Knowing that I got to compete and help win a trophy is an incredible feeling. It makes me feel very proud and makes me feel that I belong at my school. I want all young people with disabilities to experience these feelings. Unified sports is invaluable for people with disabilities. But unified sports is also really important for people without disabilities. Most people don't know what it's like to have a disability. By participating in unified sports, they really get that while everyone has differences, we all have common goals. And like many of the same things, we also have so much fun together. I am so happy to be included in a panel that is committed to making this world a better place for people with disabilities. I hope you will help my ministry create a sports-based environment for children and young people with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. And I'll pose the first question to you at this time. And the first question would be, is there enough knowledge around disability and sports?
No, we need to teach everybody, no matter who you are, how important it is to accept and include one another, no matter what the challenges might be.
Thank you very much. I'll pose the last question to both panelists that are here with us at the moment. Can government, the business sector, and the social sector be really inclusive without providing the necessary infrastructure to allow persons living with disabilities to perform sports?
Would you like to answer that, Ranako?
I was opening the floor to anybody who wishes to answer.
You're saying, can they be inclusive without providing the infrastructure?
Yes, please.
No, it's a very simple question. No, they can't be inclusive if they're not providing the infrastructure in the same way that, we've seen with, race rights, excluding people immediately and not providing the equal playing field and the ability for everybody to utilize the same infrastructures, and the ability to access sport immediately is discriminatory. And it should be actively, governments should actively seek to help provide that infrastructure and to also put in place the legal structures that promote that. And I think that's essentially what's really, really key, is that the countries where we've seen legal structures put in are the countries that we tend to see a greater movement in terms of accessibility as an example.
Yes, thank you. And I know even in your presentation, you would have mentioned accessibility. And unfortunately, sometimes one of the greatest things that we don't see when it comes to countries and globally is the accessibility for persons living with disabilities. And I think that's, very sad at this point. So I think, and the reason why I would have asked that question is because we want to have persons living with disabilities more involved in sports and more involved in sports for climate action. But then how can we have them involved in sports and sports for climate action if we're not simply just giving them access to the very sports facilities that they need?
I think the basic rights, and I think something also that we need to make clear, and it was discussed in some of the other panels, is also the impact of climate change on people with disabilities is actually massively significant. You know, the factors like increased heat and the damage that climate, like extreme weather, can cause to infrastructure has a huge impact on you know, most people with disabilities. And you're talking about populations, you know, of which I include myself, that, you know, tend to earn less financially, quite often don't have access to work. And so actually, in terms of actually integrating wholly into the society, sport is a great mechanism to make that happen, but it also, the impacts of climate change on persons with disabilities is significant, and we can't also shy away from that.
Thank you very much. Lucy, do you want to add anything at this time?
Mark.
I think it's just really, really, really important to make sure that everybody is always included in everything, no matter what, and teamwork is incredibly important.
Thank you very much. I will now reopen the floor to any of the panelists wants to give any closing remarks at this time.
No.
Okay, so thank you both Miss Lucy Meyer and Miss Alexandra Rickham for joining for this panel, for this
You're
element.
welcome.
And I'll now hand back over to Miss Ashley Lashley.